Hey guys, this is Mikro. I'm making another video. The last one did fairly well with talking about some general war stuff. This one's gonna be focused on attacking and kind of a basic war attack strategies and kind of macro play. I'm not gonna go into some of the nitty-gritty stuff that I do, but as an army as a whole, what do people that are successful in wars tend to do, and what are some basic strategies that most people. I will go over one basic strategy that at least our company in terms of dropouts, which has been fairly successful, I'd say. Kind of has won 3 or 4 servers at this point, and people transferred off. We've kind of used similar strats the entire time, and I'll go over a fairly recent one that we use, but there are some evolutions for it that I can't talk about per se, but I could talk about the basic idea that most people have down at this point. Uh, and then in terms of people that don't know me, I didn't really go into this last war, but basically have records on this whole channel. But I've been playing wars for a while now. I'd say probably 4 or 5 months with dropouts, around this time of when we started posting some of the East wars, but most of those are unlisted at this point. Since we didn't want Supple trying to figure out stuff that we were doing, and we're trying to figure out how to beat Supple, and we got very competitive. But there's a lot of content here that you can kind of go back and watch. Just started off at OPR as an OPR kind of warlord, and kind of worked my way up to the point I am now, and found a role that I like and am pretty good at. But anyways, coming back to war stuff, I'd say that the biggest idea that a lot of people don't understand is kind of fundamental with wars. And on attack, you have to pressure the point in order to cause the defense to make mistakes. If you just go for kills, you won't actually really do that much because the point isn't ticking. But if you have point pressure, then a lot of stuff becomes a lot more easier, or a lot more easy, which is why on attack a lot of people run more deady point players. People that only stay on point and just constantly have that tick, and then people that are off point are supposed to be on the edge of point and then go off point when they need help, but they're generally playing around point. This is very nice because then most of the Sacreds end up on point, and when Sacreds are on point, you get that 10% fortify, which I talked about in that last video, which is really, really key to keeping people alive, as well as the increased healing effects and constant healing. So comp-wise, this is just a sample comp I threw together that I'll probably go into more detail later. Some of these are definitely unconventional, but I have seen used in East with great effect. Supple in particular always runs an SNS. I don't see anyone else do that, and it's very, very strong. And I can go into that. EU runs a spear tank build. The dropouts ran it once or twice, and it felt very good, and it gets buffed next patch. I'd expect that to be meta. And then some of this other stuff is just triple bruiser groups, which are basically meant to CC people over and over until they die. It's a high coordination group, but it's fairly popular. This is a standard old meta group with IGVGs. None of these are hard set, but these are some concepts of groups that are popular. Deady Point IGBB triple group is very popular. Deady Point triple melee group is fairly popular. SNS is fairly popular. People don't run IGVG as much on the Deady Point, they'll just run it around the edge of point, but you can play it as a Deady. So this slot could be an IGVG, it could be an IGBB, it doesn't really matter a ton. And then you have so that's Deady Point is a section of your army. You have your ball, which is the biggest section of your army, but with how we ran stuff, our ball wasn't that. It was actually fairly small compared to most people. And then you have a backline peel group that's a pseudo that could also function as a kill squad if there's no one in your backline. And then you have 2 backline harasser groups or kill groups. There are some differences between regions. In EU, they would probably ignore all 3 of these groups, and they just run more ball, because they think that's better. NA likes to kill healers a lot, while they're ticking point, and when healers die, people just instantly die. So it's why more people in NA run the backline harasser, as well as kind of keeping the healers in check, because there's a lot of healers that aren't very good at living, and they're good at healing. A lot of the AoEs that are very good tend to stam themselves out a lot because they run refreshing evasion, because that's optimal for AoE numbers. Some of them have moved towards refreshing, which is probably better because then they're not stamming themselves out. But those people still can be caught, and if you're shooting a healer, at the end of the day, they have to focus on living, and if they're living, they aren't healing their team. So, effectively, by taking a 1v1 with the healer, you deny usually 4 people the healing. If you take out an AoE, you deny a lot of people healing, which makes it so that your ball can win harder. So that's why NA like runs these groups and not as many people in EU would run those. But then also in EU, people peel for their backline more, which is something I noticed from VODs. So that's a little bit of a difference. But going back to like a general strategy, so if you're playing to basically tick the point and then cause pressure off of that and then win off of that, this is like how we would play it usually. Usually off the gate, we would take a 50v50 or we'd have 2 people split. The 9 and 10, it doesn't have to be a whole group, but with recent progression, with people just putting decks to counter a whole side point, if you don't send a full group, it's usually safer to put a full group, and then you have like a little bit of a weaker 50v50 off the start, but it's kind of expected and it's okay to not win the 50v50 off the start. It's very nice to, but you don't have to. And then usually off of this, like for this example, I'll say that people give people will give one of these side points. The reason why people give one of these side points is if you have to defend all 3, and then what people used to do is they would do like a triple split where they went B, A, and C, and then people would have to figure out where to rotate. And this rotate from A to C is very, very long, and it was very difficult to manage, especially if you forced them to rotate to C and then back to A. And those would often be the same groups that would have to rotate between the two. And it was just very hard to do that effectively and not accidentally give up like 2 points for free. So even though you're giving up a point, it tends to be safer than actually trying to defend all 3, which I think this is like fairly common knowledge at this point, but from a attacker perspective, the way that you could exploit that is there's usually 1 point that people will just give up for free. And if you take that point early on, then you only have to worry about 2 points. So usually you'd send a group to A, a group to C, unless you know which point's the free point, like off of history, and then maybe you can only send 1 group to A. Like if you attack a company 3 times in a row and you know every single time they just gave up A for free, then we'll just send 1 group to A and don't worry about C. Like you can definitely do stuff like that, like metagame it a bit, but that's like, I guess why you would do that. And then you have most of your army on B. I'm having 1, 2, and 3 as steady point groups. 8 is like a backline group that protects AoE healers. And then 4, 5, 6, 7 as a ball group. The ball usually fights on the side of point, not directly on point, but dips their toes on the point. The reason why you don't fight directly in their backline is mainly because of horns. Which, this is what a horn does. This is why people destroy every horn in the fort, or at least the good companies do, or the best companies in New World do. So basically, people just do not die if they get this buff, and it lasts for like 10 seconds. And it has a 40-meter range, which is why it's really important to kill horns immediately when you get into fort. Like, you want to pry out gates first, but then you want to immediately kill all the horns, kill all the repair parts, kill all the cleanse buy stations, and then push. You don't try to rush things when you get to fort. So usually between like this whole outside phase to getting to fort, if you're going to win the war, you should be doing it in about 10 to 15 minutes at the slowest. If you're really, really good, you can get into fort in like 5 minutes. Sometimes, like, I think the average for us is like probably 5 to 8 minutes. And then the fort is like where the real fight happens now, since the respawn changes, or you can't respawn on a flag on defense. So anyway, you'll roll out. They'll usually get a side point, which I'm marking with a smiley face, and then you'll have your other group rotate to the other side so that you have a 40-10 split. And then this just makes it so that they have to kind of juggle between these 2 points. One thing that we've done for a while, and it's very popular at this point, is you flip these 2 groups. So you have your entire B rotate to C, and your C rotate to B. And like what that does is it basically just makes it so that their entire army has to go to C. The reason why people go to C and like don't just like stay or like something funny like that is people usually want to defend C point last, or they'll defend A point last. They don't like defending B point last because B is closer, and then in theory you could also surround B. In practice, I don't think that's actually as good as B last, but that's kind of a recent development. It's like, because B, you could actually recontest really easily since you have spawns universally around the fort, versus C, it's like if you have a long spawn and then you have to go all the way to C, then you're probably not going to be able to recontest it very well. But that's like a more recent thing. But even if they just decide to give up B for free, you'll still end up capping C off of a play like this. And then the last trick with this idea of like rotating your army to the other point is you want to send your respawns back to B. Like you're basically telling where your respawns to go between B and C, and it's just going to be kind of random where people end up, and that's okay. You just want to cap one of these points, and by doing this, it makes it really easy to cap one of these points because the defenders are going to run out of cleanse spots, and you have closer respawns. So in this situation, say they gave up B, then you put your whole army in C. This is like kind of how people position. You are basically surrounding the point. 9 and 10 in this case would be like backline harassers, 8's protecting your backline, 4, 5, 6, 7 are ball, 1, 2, 3 are deady point. Backline harassers probably won't do a great job because there's only like one group of them, but it's enough to keep most people out of your backline for extended periods of time, and then the way that you build that group is just to slow people down mostly. So like IGBB with exhaustive net shot, that really makes it so it's really hard to actually like run away from them, and because light players usually use their dodges to actually position rather than to dodge things, they stamina themselves a lot. So this basically makes it so that they won't be able to recover their stamina, and then they're just sitting ducks because they just wasted all their stamina, and now they're sitting in open space, so they need to just shoot them with like bows and fire staffs and blunderbuss, and they just die. So it makes it so that they have to play differently in your backline, and it makes it so that your healers have a better opportunity to live. So yeah, this would be like a example of how you roll out. Eventually, you'll probably cap this. You might have to do like regroups if you are not having a great war. You might have to like there's like general different strategies to get here. Like you could put your whole army through ramparts and then knock out their backline and go to point. You can kill healers and then go to point. But in general, if you want to actually cap the point, you need to find a way to get point pressure. Like if they have 20 people just sitting on point and you're not on point, you probably don't want to go to the 20 people, and you probably want to kill healers. So there's like a game sense part of that I could go into a different video, but this is just like general macro stuff. So just like assume you find a way to win C point because you are better than them. Now you have all 3 points, and then you're going to start off zerging this first gate. I think my slides got mixed up for some reason. But you have everyone go to this first gate to shoot the door and break it. It's just because it's super, super fast. And then you want to break horns and then rotate. The reason why you want to break horns is because this is really, really annoying. It's mostly your mages breaking your horns, and your melee are just going to rotate early. And your blunderbuss as well. And when you're breaking horns, you want to ideally use ice damage if you're arranged, because it actually does more damage to siege. So you want to basically be using your Ice Gauntlet. If you have something with Enchanted, that helps too. Or Ruinous is not even bad, because Ice Gauntlet basically only has like 1 or 2 perks that are important. Because you don't really use it for anything outside of abilities and breaking siege in a war. Besides maybe a heavy root, but it's like not as common of a play as it used to be, because the Void Gauntlet's better, or the Blunderbuss is better to have out. So say you break B, and then you get into the next stage. This is where people split off. So like your backline groups will usually go to the back gates and break these down, and then you have your C gate A, or what's this point? So this would be C point A gate because they flip for some reason, and then you'd have people stay here, and those people would just basically make sure that this gate doesn't get repaired. They aren't really doing a ton besides like finishing the job of breaking horns. And if they can get in for free, they'll try to get in for free. But then your main ball, like your other groups, will just rotate off to B. They'll break the B gate, break the B horns, and then your last group will rotate off to C. And the way I arranged this was so that this is like more advanced stuff that I don't completely understand because I don't usually call wars, but this is like kind of from practice. But 1, 2, and 3 are like really, really tanky, right? So if you put them on the same point, they won't really kill anything. Like if you put them on the same gate, nothing will really die. So you usually want to spread them out. They're also really, really good at leading the charge through a gate because they're super, super tanky and are supposed to be able to play on point. So they're built that way. So I think it's a good idea to generally spread those out. And then 8, this is your backline group again, and then these are standard ball groups, these are standard ball groups. I think not zerging through B off the bat is generally best. If you zerg through B, it's like really, really easy just to get stuck. If you go through the side gates, they're like a little bit harder to defend. It also puts you close to the repair part stations, which I go into here. Or actually, no, this is the slide of just breaking all the gates. And then this is like repair part stations, so they're like all spread around the map. The reason why you break the repair parts and you break the cleanse buy spots is because if they don't have cleanse buys, they effectively people will just die in the ball fight, and you'll have a big advantage as attackers. So if you can get those early, like I'd say if you have 10 minutes left in a war, you probably already lost the war, to be honest, if you get into fort with 10 minutes. If you have like, but if you even like breaking those is like relatively pointless because people have enough for the rest of the war. There's also like I believe it's the Windsword Fort that gives you a chance to not consume a cleanse pot when you pop it, which is like pretty nice for a war. And there's also a perk that you can get on jewelry, I believe, like duplicating toast, that lets you conserve cleanse pots, and those are more meta just to prevent this strategy from happening, which is, I guess, more advanced and won't apply to most wars. But if you're like on defense and then you're worried about running out of cleanse spots as perks, and that fort's very important. So it's also important for attackers to control that fort before the war and during the war, and same with defenders. So you want to break those just so people can't buy the cleanse spots for free, and repairers can't just keep repairing gates over and over, and it makes it more difficult for their army to fight in clumps in general. And then basically till 10 minutes, you're not looking to like actually win, but you're looking to just like force cleanse pots to like get burned and try to make them low on resources, so when the respawns are longer, then you have an opportunity to win if you just wipe them because they have no cleanse pots. So it's like a cleanse pot starving strat. I don't think it really works very well if you don't get in a fort with like, let's say 15 to 25 minutes. Like if you don't get in a fort with that window, it's definitely less effective. But if you have time and you can pull that off, it's a very, very effective and easy way to win wars. Like if you get into a fort with over 15 minutes and you aren't winning the war, you're probably not doing this, and your IGL is probably making a mistake. So then you get in a fort, and then you have some people preventing the gates from getting repaired. Usually that's like a combination of decks and super tanky people. And then meanwhile everyone else is trying to figure out a way up top till people call to crash. And then when you crash point, people jump down on the center point, they start the tick. You have your AoEs generally playing around B with your backline helper group, who also can function as a preventing B repairs. And then you have your backline harassers spread out, and then people are generally either controlling respawns or controlling like important areas of the fort. These groups are not very accurate, I'd say. Like it's like really war dependent and dependent on like the IGL strat. Like, do you actually want to control respawns? Do you want to just put all the pressure on point that you can? Do you want to hunt healers, and then once you get an opening, then do you want to go in? Like, do you want to play off triggers? That's like very IGL dependent and will depend on the war. And then finally, you usually, when you're getting point and it's at like, let's say 25 to 75%, people are going to crash. People that crash on point will be crashing from respawns usually, so from here, 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 and here. So then you kind of want to have groups to prevent them from just insta-wiping you, as well as defenders usually prio holding the B gate so that your respawns can't get back. They can't get as easily back in, which is why it's important for your respawns to try to come through A and C gates at this point and not through B. You can send some through B, but a lot of people will tunnel vision in a war, and they'll just respawn B and try to get through this clump, and it can be very hard to get through this clump. But if you go through A and C, then it's like free to get in, and if they're defending B, then you just hit them on these angles, and it's like a lot easier. And then basically you just need one wipe at any point within 10 minutes in a fort to win a war, or just being up 10 people and then all-ending point. That works as well. But it's the same thing as outside, where you need to be able to pry a point to force pressure, to force mistakes, to get the opportunity to win. So having deady people that can actually live on point is very, very important. Which comes back to the army comp idea. So IGBB, talked about that last video. I think this is the tankiest build in the game by far. Very popular in EU, more popular in NA now than it used to be. I reference EU a lot because they have more players, so they, in theory, should be better at the game. I don't think they're better in some aspects, but I think in the group play aspect, EU is significantly better than NA. But in the kill squad aspect, I think NA is significantly better than EU. Just from watching lots of VODs. So Great Axe Warhammer less tanky, but it's basically if you get stun chained and they're not getting, if you are getting stun chained and they're not getting stun chained, your clump's gonna die. But if you stun chain them and then your clump's not getting stun chained, then their clump's gonna die. And the people that help with the stun chains are the Warhammer players, which always come with the Great Axe because it's not really viable with any other weapon at the moment. Maybe with Greatsword it'll be a little different. But that stun chaining aspect is like another reason why some people pry off Freedom. Not for, because staggers you can just instantly get out of, but stun chains actually just wipe you. But sometimes Freedom isn't even enough to prevent, like, against a very good stun chain. So that's a important aspect. But that's why these triple melee groups are fairly popular. I'd say it's a fairly old concept at this point, like maybe a 1 or 2 month old. Like that group has been around. SNS, the reason why I put SNS on here, I don't think SNS is popular for anyone but Supple. And guess what Supple is doing? They have like one East for the last like 3 or 4 months, and they run this build, and no one else does. So like, why is it really good? It's basically this defensive formation thing. So it's like it's a 30% AoE fortify by just playing on your SNS guy, which is very nice. I think NA hasn't been as successful with this, or West NA, because a lot of the SNS players go 500 con, and guys in Supple I don't believe go 500 con. And then they also have, they play for Plague Strikes, so it's like you do a heavy attack with your Sword and Shield, and then you put a 24% disease. So like for reference, this is, if you had Void Gauntlet Scream, and you put that on your armor, that's basically as much as this disease is, and it has no cooldown, and it lasts for 8 seconds, so it's actually insane. And then there's this other perk that I believe you could stack on as well that puts like a 15% rend on people, so you could basically build SNS to just like destroy and nuke clumps, as well as SNS having like the perk that slows people down after like your second attack. I forget where it is in this tree. Oh, right here. Final attack in your light chain inflicts a 20% slow. So this basically means that people can't run away from you, and it will be even better next patch when people can't run if they're in like medium or light for a certain period of time. And in heavy, I believe it's half a second, medium's 1 second, light's 1.5 seconds. The SNS thing is like a thing or the spear build as a Daddy Point. This is going to seem very, very weird, and it's more of an up-and-coming thing. It has been run in EU, and we ran it on East for a little bit. I'd say it was like fairly successful. Not like meta-breaking, but it was better than what most slots in that spot would be. The reason why that one is good is you have Fortify Perforates, which is like, how much is it? It's Shield Bash. So yeah, so basically, an SNS build has a ton of like Fortify, which is why it's good. You won't die, so you'll make clumps. Fortify Perforate, so you put this on a weapon that's, you're at fort cap off of that alone, so it's pretty good. You put that on your armor and your 30%, so it's also pretty good. And then you also have, clicking too many buttons. You also have a knockdown ability with the sweep. You don't actually go into this last perk because you're not actually doing damage, you're just trying to put people on the ground. And then Cyclone just generates stamina. I don't know if Cyclone's actually necessary next patch, because I'll just play like this for reference, but this is a build from next patch, and like you look how much his stamina goes up. Like you basically have unlimited stamina with this build, which means more dodges means you're going to take less damage, and you can effectively tank. It's like the Paul Ponce build, but actually run in a way that it could be meta, because he runs it as a damage build, but the people are running it as a utility build for purely for the rend that it could output. So that's what I meant by last video of rend builds being more popular. Ball groups, this is pretty standard IGVG, IGBB. This is like what people in EU run all the time. NA sometimes does double IGVG, which is why I put it here, or triple melee, which is why I put it here. I'd say that this setup is probably ideal with the IGBBs. It just, you want to have a decent amount of IGVGs just to strip fortify. So if you took IGVGs out here, then you'd probably want IGVG as your deady point, or you'd want more IGVGs in like these groups. And backline peel, this is generally IGBBs. This is like the 150 con build that I talked about. These could also be the 150 con build, but these are 200 heavies every time. I'd say that this comp is like harder to run too, because less people run IGBB in NA. It's not very flashy, I guess, for people, or less fun. I think the 150 version is a lot more fun than the Deady Point version, but the Deady Point version is also really, really fun if you have Refreshing Ward, and you can just like kind of do things that don't make sense, and you should not be able to live, but you just do. Because Blunderbuss is stupid. And then Fire Staff is just generally decent off point, especially if you have people that come from that meta where Ice Spike was meta, and those people that could still play the game very well. That's where that slot's like really, really nice. If you don't have that kind of player, maybe you slot in other decks. This is like less important, but the IGBBs being on the same page and shooting the same target, and that is very, very key for a backline peel group, because they don't even have to use an ability to put that pressure, and it's ranged pressure. And I talked about that like last video a bit, but that will basically force people to not be able to play in your backline, along with the exhaustive net shot that I talked about earlier. So you're basically making it so it's very hard for people to play in your backline, and if they do play in your backline, you have the ability just to kill them instantly. So that's very good. The bow, we usually put one of those in there too, just to help with the damage, especially because IGBB will make it so that people can't dodge, and they can't they stam themselves, right? And if they've stammed themselves, it's very, very hard to dodge a bow, which is why bow works very well with IGBBs as well. This isn't like a hard set in stone group, but this is like just an example of like how you'd run it. Usually you run a clap healer with this because people are spread out more and they're not as grouped. And you'd want to still throw your Sacreds on point, most likely. And I don't really know what healers run, but that I'd say Sacreds on point in general is very underrated and very, very important if you want to win a war, especially on attack. This is like a backline harasser example group. BBVG is a build I talked about a little bit that last video. It works very well in the slot because you can, again, prevent people with exhaustive net shot from actually being able to run away. And then VG has a lot of lockdowns. And then if you run this in like light, then you can actually get away from things like fairly well. And if you have like a build with keen speed, then you can get away even better. And it won't get stripped because you aren't going to be playing your clumps where the oblivions are dropped. So this is like a spot where that kind of build works very, very well. But you could run like a BBIG there if you wanted to. You could run a Fire Staff there. I'd say the light Great Axe Warhammer like build is like fairly set in stone for that kind of role because it just forces so many cooldowns and has the potential to kill clumps very effectively and hurt healers, which makes it like uniquely generally better as a go-to backline harasser. And then your other one, usually people run a musket or two, just because healers hate them. And it's, if you're running something that people generally hate, you're generally doing a good thing, or they get annoyed by. And then schizos people also get very annoyed by. So I just threw those in a group. That's like two examples. SNS Hatchet, less good than it used to be, still playable. BB Warhammer's like the new version of it, but you kind of have to all in with your combo, so it's like less good. But those builds are still good. You could run something like Spear Rapier, just like a lot of different things. But yeah, that's a example for all this. I threw together a few example tech trees. This would be the SNS, this would be Spear Tank, this would be like your BB with 150, what I talked about last video, so you can go there for like more info on that. And then I guess otherwise, that's just kind of it for general war macro. I guess to like review stuff, the most important thing by far, like once you get all the 3 points, if you can't cap the 3 points, then you probably have a ball diff, to be honest. And there's not much that can be done about that. People just need to like work on their mechanics, being groups in OPR, do dual knights, like all that kind of thing. If you can't cap 3 points, something is generally wrong. It should be fairly easy to get to a last point if you do a strat like this, where you split between 2 points and cap the 3 point, and it's fairly consistent. It's just this last point can be a little bit difficult, but it's not so bad if you do things like clearing through ramparts. If you just do rotations and like time your abilities to actually kill a decent amount of people, then it's not as bad. And the main thing is just when a point is ticking and you're at like 75%, you know they're about to crash, so you want to save your cooldowns and actually hit that crash and like meet it. And if you prevent them from getting on the point easily, you'll just cap it, which is why B is maybe easier to defend than C is at this point, because B is easier to recontest on, versus C, it's like you have to do this very, very long rotation, and everyone's coming from one direction, and from a very long run from a fort, so yeah, that's my pitch to defending B. And then you want to rotate, you want to clear gates and horns, and then rotate with them, clearing those horns, because tier 3 horns are absolutely broken. This will basically make it so no one can die. Like I have old wars recorded where I blew 50 horns and single-handedly like won a war because people would not kill horns. And if you're not killing horns at this point, then you probably haven't had that happen to you. But I would recommend not having that happen to you and just kill the horns just to be safe. There are some like better horns to kill than others, but in general they're all useful, and it doesn't take that long if everyone's playing that way to break the horns before you go in. Especially because you can't really win a war before 10 minutes, unless you're significantly outmatched just because of the way respawns work and how tanky people are at this current patch. So you're looking for that, you'll rotate around, make sure to break those cleanse buy stations, because that's like another way to win the war. So there's a lot of different ways here to win the war, but you basically just need the defenders to make a mistake and then they just win. So it's like trying to find ways to force mistakes, and getting rid of cleanse buys is another way to prevent them to being able to recover from mistakes. Killing healers is a way to prevent them from being able to recover from mistakes. In general, putting your pressure either on spots where everyone else is putting their pressure, or putting your pressure on spots that don't have sacreds to force those sacreds to go to those spots. Like if you pressure a healer and they have to sacred themselves, that's one less sacred that goes on the clump, and that can be a very big deal sometimes. So stuff like that is very, very good. And then if you have to do a regroup, you generally get up top and do a regroup at the same time, because it's very hard to recontest. It's hard for defenders to clear up top if everyone gets up there, because the staircases are just so small. And then if you're up top, then they can't defend the gates as well, and they just jump down at the same time, trying to nuke some people and get on point. And you want to time all of this off of respawns, ideally. And if you want an example of like how to time stuff off respawns, there's a thing called a respawn timer.
30 seconds.
And this will play the audio every single time and tell you when respawns are. So this is a very important thing to use that every good company uses and newer companies might not know about. It's very annoying, but it's very helpful and good if someone calls those. If you don't call respawn, if you call respawns, the wars will be a lot easier. And if you play off of respawns, like if you try to kill people after the respawn and you put them on long spawns, it's even better. If you think you're about to die, you want to die before the respawn, so you don't have as long of a respawn. So using that is very, very important. And I think that's about it for the general macro. This comp stuff, I wouldn't say this is a perfect comp at all. I wouldn't say it's like even ideal. I threw together a couple different styles in the sheet. I don't usually make comps, but you want a lot of Great Axe Warhammer people. This is on the lower end. I know some companies run up to like 18 of these. IGBB, very somehow underrated in NA. I don't really understand how. EU has been like preaching IGBB since BB like came out like 4 months ago or something like that. Like they've been like, oh, why is NA not running BB? That's why EU is better than NA. And I don't really understand why NA is not on that train yet, but maybe people are just playing to have fun in NA and not try hard super much. IGVG is still popular, but less popular than it used to be. The best part about IGVG at this point is stripping cooldowns. It's not the actual disease itself, because disease is so common. And then you want to have backline people and a lot of healers, and that's about it. And if you guys have other things that you want me to talk about, just leave a comment or whatever, and I can go into that. And that's it.